Let's do the introductions of the judges, beginning with our new judge, whose name I don't know, so I can't introduce him.
So my name is Guido Nunez. What company I work for?
Just a little 10 words about your background. What do you do?
I work for the Colgate-Palmolive company, and then I also run my real estate investment company that buys apartments.
Rob, you want
Yes, I do. I'm Robert Beamer, and I have a background in financial brokers, securities, licensed as a 766 FINRA rep. Also involved in higher ed. So, yeah.
Okay, nice.
My name is Tom Fain. I'm a required securities lawyer, and I'm your senior judge for today. They have given me this statement to read, but I refuse. We'll just go over the rules. I know you know them.
Yeah.
The principal one is you have 25 minutes, not 26. And we'll interrupt you when we get to 25 minutes if you're still going, even if you're about to show us slides of Hillary Clinton's wedding. This is the 25 minutes. After it, there'll be a 10 or 15 minute question session. And then I think tomorrow there's the 2 other presentations.
Correct.
Okay, so that's about it. If it turns out that when we get to the question part, we don't have any questions, don't worry about that. It means you've done a good job.
All right.
Now, who are you?
My name is Brian. I am the Chief Operations Officer for Minosihtahk.
My name is Rebecca Whitmell, and I am the Chief Legal Officer.
My name is Minosihtahk, and I will be the Chief Ethics Officer.
And I'm Chad, and I'm the Chief Financial Officer.
Okay, whoever gets to start should do so now.
All right, thank you everybody. So we are Minosihtahk, and we'll be talking about opportunities for decent work and Indigenous partnerships regarding lithium in Alberta. We would like to acknowledge that our team is not of Indigenous descent or heritage. We have approached our presentation and research from a non-Indigenous ontological perspective. Therefore, we are interpreting the research that we found as reality. So I'll start off by giving some background on the general context that your company is facing. We'll also be focusing on where your company is at in the value chain, specifically at the extraction level. Alberta has had a strong fossil fuel industry for many decades, which has supported their economy. But now there is a global shift towards sustainability with the introduction of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the global goal to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050. This will mean that Alberta will have to shift away from their previous success with fossil fuels towards a more sustainable energy sector. Fortunately, Alberta has access to over 4% of the mineral deposits in the lithium deposits in the world, and your company has access to over 4 million acres of mineral titles containing this mineral. The question is, how can your company stand out from others who are producing lithium around the world and in North America to attract those battery manufacturers making electric vehicles? So our consulting company name is Minosihtahk. This is the Cree word for restore. And the context of this word is the representation of reconciliation through environmental sustainability. Indigenous peoples value the land and water and wish to protect it for future generations. And they also want to gain economic benefits for their communities. We have developed our solutions with their values in mind. So our first problem we have identified is that there are currently unsustainable methods around the world and in Alberta to produce, around the world to produce lithium, which leads to negative land impacts. Secondly, there is a history of a lack of Indigenous consultation in Alberta and around the world in mining development sectors, which leads to high litigation costs. And lastly, there are incoming job layoffs and low Indigenous employment in the fossil fuel industry. So Alberta will have to shift away from that and provide more decent work and economic growth through a different avenue. Our first solution is to pursue direct lithium extraction as a cleaner solution to other traditional methods of mining lithium, and also using abundant geothermal resources to power the operations. Secondly, we recommend that you use impact and benefit agreements, which are legal contracts between companies and Indigenous communities to promote consultation and avoid court cases. And lastly, we suggest that you employ Indigenous people and also local people as well for powering your working for your lithium operations. Each of these solutions will help you to avoid risk financially and legally, as well as to have a sustainable and ethical lithium product to stand out from others. So the strengths that you have in Alberta are that there are those abundant geothermal resources located near lithium-rich deposits that you can tap into. There's also government support in terms of incentives and monetary support. And the previous oil and gas background in Alberta shows that there are experienced workers with similar skills and also existing well sites that can be used for mining, extracting the lithium as well. And we also looked at your website and found that your company goals align with our solutions. So for example, you would like a strategic energy future, and we are trying to provide that with our solutions. You also want to attract clean battery manufacturers, and our solutions are the cleaner alternative. And you want to have a prosperous future for all Canadians, so including Indigenous people, including local people, will help you reach that goal. Now Manisha will talk about the ethical aspect of our solution.
Thank you, Rebecca. So I'll be diving deeper into the ethical aspects of our recommendations. For clarity purposes, your company, Lithium Bank, is not a bank, but instead a lithium production company. So our focus will be on Indigenous perspectives on lithium mining, their interest in equitable development, the treaty land in Alberta, as well as the truth and reconciliation calls to action. We'll then focus on the ethical and sustainable impacts of traditional mining methods compared to direct lithium extraction. To consider Indigenous perspectives on lithium mining, we look at their history with lithium mines around the world. So Indigenous peoples are against traditional lithium mining methods because of the negative impact it has on their land and water, which they believe does not justify having more electric vehicles in the first place. Another negative impact is that they're currently not reaping any economic benefits, but instead are being negatively impacted through their land. We now know that Indigenous people would value informed consent as well as the implementation of Indigenous justice frameworks through their conversations with companies. Companies should speak with them and consider their perspectives before assuming that they know best. Alberta is an entire treaty land. Lithium and your mining projects fall under Green Treaty 8 and Yellow Treaty 6. This map also labels various Indigenous communities that your company can tap into for potential employment. Treaty lands were created with the purpose for Indigenous people to have access to the resources of the land, hunt, and fish. Treaties were created in the 1800s with the purpose to serve that access for those Indigenous peoples. Unfortunately, when the signing happened, certain Indigenous people groups were not understanding what they were signing due to the language barriers. We believe that speaking with them now is a good step in the right direction. Indigenous people have 4 core values: honor, honesty, humility, and trust. Unfortunately, these values were not honored in the initial signing of those treaties. To reconcile this, we have identified specific calls to action that we believe to be relevant to our case. The Truth and Reconciliation Calls to Action document was a foundational document created in 2015 with the purpose to serve the government, Indigenous, and non-Indigenous people a path towards reconciliation together. This is relevant because we are suggesting for you to employ Indigenous people as well as consider their perspectives when proceeding with such development projects. We believe number 7 and number 92 to be the most relevant. Call to action number 7 talks about bridging educational and employment gaps. You would be doing so by employing Indigenous peoples in your projects. Call to action number 92 talks about business and reconciliation. In the past, these types of community groups have been brushed to the side as if they are an obstacle. However, we believe that they can actually offer beneficial information on being sustainable for the future through their history. Hard rock mining is currently expensive as it is shipped to China for processing. It also contaminates groundwater, rivers, and soils. Solar evaporation is typically used in South America. One single solar pool holds 225 million gallons of water. Not only does it take away the land's resources, but it also takes away the resources of the local communities. If having more electric vehicles costs healthy land, it is clearly not sustainable. Car manufacturers have pledged to get their batteries from manufacturers that use sustainable methods themselves. So your company could benefit by not using traditional mining methods, but instead implementing direct lithium extraction. Direct lithium extraction is more sustainable and a safer method than traditional mining methods that were previously used. Another benefit is that the land used for direct lithium extraction is significantly lower than that of traditional mining. Also, the process itself is quite similar to the oil and gas processes which Alberta already uses as their main industries, so the transfer would be much smoother. I'll now pass it back over to Rebecca to talk about the legal implications of our recommendations.
All right, so to start off, I'll talk about a little bit of the history of Indigenous consultation in Canada and how you can avoid risk by having good relationships with them. So in 1982, Section 35 of the Canadian Constitution was introduced, and this recognized Aboriginal and treaty rights. Ever since then, mining development companies have to consult with Indigenous communities before they start any of their projects. There are increased agreements on treaty land, you can see in the graph here, since around 1982 when this was implemented, and this is because of the increased incentives and expedited negotiation processes. Indigenous people do not have the right to veto, per se, any operation, but they are in support of them, and we can see this through the increasing agreements. There is, since 2000, there have been over 400 mining agreements with Indigenous communities and companies. Next, the impact and benefit agreements. So these are legal contracts that can be signed between Indigenous communities and your company, and they can identify any negative impacts that your project may have and steps taken to mitigate those impacts. They can also include additional components that can be discussed, such as employment opportunities and profit sharing. They also align with your goals of building a prosperous future because you are including them, and it helps you to avoid any court cases, which we'll talk about shortly. So there have been many different conflicts and different cases with mining development companies and Indigenous communities. So, for example, the Mackenzie Valley Gas Pipeline, they wanted to build a pipeline, and it went through a lot of years of Indigenous consultation and environmental assessment. And in the end, it did not happen, and they lost out on a project that could have been worth around $411 billion today. Next, the Teck Resources wanted to open their Frontier Oil Sands project, but through environmental assessment and Indigenous consultation, they pulled out and they lost out on the $20 billion project that they could have had. And lastly, the Coastal GasLink versus the Wet'suwet'en people. This is one of the protests shown on the slide here when they're on the rail tracks. And this resulted in severe delays for their project and costs as well for them. There were 500 stranded workers at one time because of the protests. They also had to, the RCMP had to spend $21 million in policing because of protests, and they had a delay in their $6.6 billion project. They are now consulting with Indigenous people properly, but if they had done so beforehand, perhaps they would have been able to avoid all these issues. Now I'll talk about the most important aspects of different federal and provincial documents. So starting off, the Canadian Minerals and Metals Plan was created in 2019 when Canada acknowledged that they have potential in the mining industry and wanted to accelerate their efforts. And so they created this, and they had the vision that Canada will be the leading mining nation. Next, they created the Canadian Critical Minerals Strategy, and this was to show a more detailed overview of what they wanted to accomplish. So they did identify lithium as one of the 6 of 31 critical minerals they wanted to prioritize. So they have different tax incentives, monetary support, and also incentives for consulting with Indigenous people. They have a $25 million participation fund, a national benefit sharing framework to ensure that they are benefiting from these projects. And it's also, they also support the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, also known as UNDRIP. For the provincial legal documents, so the Mineral Resource Development Act was recently updated just this March, and it included more clarity for brine-hosted minerals because they're trying to streamline the processes more. And lithium is that brine-hosted mineral in Alberta, so it shows that they are in the right direction. The Mines and Mineral, there's also a few other documents that have different aspects that are important for your project. The Mines and Minerals Act states that those with mineral titles have access to geothermal resources and can use them. So our solution of having those geothermal resources and using those to power your operations is legal. The Metallic Industrial Mineral Tenure Regulation is under the Mines and Minerals Act and states that those with permits, such as your company, can apply for a license which does not need to be renewed. And the Liability Management Framework states that lithium companies have to clean up their wells in the far future when they're finished operations, meaning that you'll have a sustainable end to your life cycle. And the most important document for provincial legal documents is the Renewing Alberta's Mineral Future. So this was created in 2020 and 2021 with key stakeholders, including Indigenous communities, industry leaders, and the government, and much more. and they wanted to clarify and re-energize the Alberta mining sector. So for example, they had a detailed action plan, and they had different steps including advancing Indigenous partnership, improving all their decent work, and advancing legal, streamlining legal processes. So now Amandeep is going to talk about decent work in more detail.
Thank you, Rebecca. Now we're talking about our solutions in terms of decent work related to SDG 8. So I'm going to begin with answering, what is decent work? SDG 8 states it is securing a safe and secure work environment for all workers. With regards to our solutions, I'll be discussing job opportunities, education, interprovincial employees, transportation costs, and workplace health and safety. With 80% tech and expertise overlap, oil and gas will be the benchmark. We're estimating over 200,000 lithium extraction jobs in Alberta for new positions or oil and gas transition. Clean Energy Canada estimated that by 2030, Canada's EV battery supply chain will support 331,000 direct and indirect jobs. These jobs can support an opportunity for Indigenous people with decent work. But do Indigenous Canadians have the skill set? Absolutely. 53% of Indigenous people in Alberta have a post-secondary education. So this means they can do these jobs. Call to action number 7, mentioned by Manisha, indicates closing the education and job gap, which provides Indigenous people with a better quality of life. However, this 53% can increase. The government of Alberta is offering a $12,000 tuition voucher for mining workers, which will be utilized in 26 post-secondary institutions as well as 5 Indigenous institutions. However, where are these oil and gas workers coming from? In 2016, Canadian Energy Centre has identified where interprovincial employees are coming from to Alberta. 37% displacement employees are coming from British Columbia, while 20% are coming from Atlantic Canada. However, charter flights are expensive for these migrant workers. Those coming from Atlantic Canada to Alberta is $7 million annually. So how can you reduce this cost? Well, it's simple. Hiring locals will prevent this cost. Local communities have large populations and oilfield experts, which can help result in this. You can also use charter buses, which will only incur $16,000 annually. Not only you will decrease in transportation costs, but CO2 emissions as well. As climate change and air quality is an issue in today's society, companies need to do their part. Finally, workplace health and safety is vital for your company. Since 2013-2017, there has been over 11,000 oil and gas industry workers in Alberta, which has claimed over $70 million in claim cost. On the right, you can see some of the injuries that are included in this statistic. So how can you ensure your employees are safe in this upcoming lithium industry? It's simple. Keep with simple, descriptive, and brief guidelines regarding aspects like building safety, sanitation, and personal protective equipment. Keeping up with these regular changes in this industry will help ensure the safety of your employees. Now, after discussing the decent work on just a minor aspect, I'd like to bring my Chief Financial Officer, Chad, to discuss the financial aspect on the macro level.
Thank you very much, Aman. So I'll begin our financial discussion talking about direct lithium extraction, or DLE. Now, you are considering using this technique, and we encourage that. As compared to solar evaporation, it uses a fraction of the land. It's faster, battery-ready lithium, 99% pure, immediately ready to ship off to battery companies and use. It also uses, it also uses considerably less water and less space. Now, on top of that, you do have to clean up afterwards, as Rebecca had mentioned. So that impact costs you clean up an orphan well, it costs about $170,000. But if you're using the solar evaporation method for your brine, you'd also be testing ground soil, testing water, and filling a dozen plus Olympic-sized swimming pools. So that'll increase your cost considerably. We are encouraging specifically the use of ion exchange DLE technology, which is newer but has been tested on a small scale, and that's where you get this speed from. At the bottom, I have a capital cost of a DLE ion exchange facility. So here you see that cost again, 1.037 billion. Your cash operating cost per ton of lithium is about $5,000, and your average annual operating costs are a little over 250 million. But we can bring those average operating costs down. As Rebecca had mentioned, you automatically gain access to the geothermal resources by your lithium deposits. You could use natural gas power, you could carbon capture it and trap it back down in the brine aquifers where you're withdrawing your brine, but geothermal energy will save you money. And your boardwalk project is located right here at about where the words Grand Prairie are, which is coincidentally where I was born. And then your Park Place project is northeast of Edson here. So this gives you the opportunity to produce power off of the land that you're on, and it is a money generating asset after the life of the project. Once you're out of brine, you still generate power that you can sell back to the Alberta government. Also, a brand new federal budget has announced $20 billion available for clean electricity investments that you can tap into. Now, there is a company planning to use 3 group facilities to pull 150,000 tons per year, and based on Goldman Sachs estimates, that could be worth up to $15 billion next year. There's a reason the world is calling lithium white gold, and that is primarily due to the supply and demand. Some experts think we might reach a meeting of those two by 2030, but Benchmark Minerals, it doesn't see that coming anytime in the near future with the planned supply. You will be operating in Alberta, but you might not be aware of all your advantages. As Alman had mentioned, we do have an 80% overlap in technical expertise and technology with the oil and gas industry. So you have a potential army of experts at your disposal and a government that's bending over backwards to help you with their infrastructure, because they do need to phase out these fossil fuels and move ahead as zero carbon emission goals are needing to be met. The federal government is also providing multiple tax incentives, millions for R&D, billions for strategic development, and even President Biden recently got involved and offered $250 million US for battery minerals coming out of Canada. But your biggest cost savings actually comes from royalties. In Alberta, they're asking for a flat rate of less than $3,000 per ton, compared to low-cost Chile, who's taking $6,500 per ton, completely eliminating any low-cost advantage and putting you on par. Even the United States and Australia are taking more for royalties, above $300 more at the moment, but that's at the current price of lithium because they are taking it on a percentage base. As a note, the new Nevada operation for withdrawing lithium is unique to either ore or brine because it's in clay, and so it's brand new, they're working on it, but it will be difficult to make that environmentally sustainable. Now, not only do you have a rare commodity in lithium, but you have an extra rare commodity in ethical lithium. Most of the lithium on the market is coming out of the lithium triangle in South America or from China. And these companies do have a history of issues with both social and environmental issues. So people are buying this ethical lithium. Most auto manufacturers have signed on to the Initiative for Responsible Mining Insurance, saying that they will get socially and environmentally ethical lithium for their products, including 3 North American manufacturers at Ford, Tesla, and GM. So you can be that supply. More specifically, you can be that local supply. As COVID-19 and the Ukraine war have taught us, having a local supply is key. On top of that, the International Council on Mining and Metals, as well as the World Bank's Equator Principles, have stated that responsible lending requires cooperation with Indigenous peoples, and so you'll be ahead of the curve on that. But let's get down to brass tacks. If you're building a 50,000 ton facility, you can be making $2.8 billion per profit at the current price of lithium. You'll recoup your costs in less than half a year, and you have 10 potential sites, 4 at the Boardwalk site and 6 at Park Place. So total lifetime potential profit of $840 billion with the 30-year life of your brines. The geothermal plan saves you about $150 million and generates $5 million per year after that, which does not seem like a lot compared to the billions, but it could be a lot for Indigenous communities. You could generate power off the land and give it back to the people who were its traditional caretakers. It's practically poetic. So it's our recommendation that you give that money to local Indigenous communities to use as they see fit, where you can cooperate with them in similar ways to SNC-Lavalin in British Columbia, a major Canadian engineering firm, who offers EDI training programs, scholarships, and invests in Indigenous businesses. So by following our plan, you will negate any legal or financial risks, and with DLE geothermal energy, and by empowering Indigenous people through cooperation, you will be environmentally, socially, and financially successful. lead the world, differentiate yourself from your competitors, and take us into a future with decent work and sustainability. Thank you.
Questions?
Yeah, I was wondering, with lithium, we had a chart where you showed the different countries.
Yes.
Is there a difference in quality of lithium where Chile lithium is better and manufacturer wants that better and they'll pay a premium?
It's actually worse.
It's
Solar
worse.
evaporation, you get 28% purity, and then you have to purify it again. By using DLE technology, you get 99% pure lithium right away, no other processing on site.
And if that's the case, is there an opportunity to charge more for Alberta lithium because it's better?
You could potentially, I mean, you have less steps along the way, but it depends on how it all shakes down and all the variables, but that is definitely possible.
Okay.
Anything else?
No.
Rob?
Yeah, thank you very much. You know, appreciate the compelling nature of this, and it seemed very urgent and intuitive. I think consulting with Indigenous groups is something that has been a very missed opportunity, not only in our industry, but across many similar, and it speaks to you know, the opportunity cost of not doing it, which is immense, and the proof's in the pudding, as you said. So to kind of go back to some of these stats, in your executive summary, you indicate that there's quite a bit on the table for us to consider, just in terms of financial remuneration opportunities, 30% critical mineral exploration tax credit from the Canadian government, a $40 million amount to support regulation and permitting, and $1.5 billion to support critical mineral projects. Talk a little bit about that. So in order for us to recoup those monies, are those just kind of pie in the sky numbers, or is there a real opportunity here, and how would we get our hands on that?
Absolutely. It's just a matter of applying for it and getting approved. They'll ask you the questions that they need, and the government will send you the money. It's not terribly complicated. A few hoops to jump through, but that 40 million in regulatory funding can be used to make that easier on you.
Okay.
I think to add to that, just like, you know, the world's perspective on sustainability and ethics going forward, like there is this funding available for a reason. So if your company is able to take advantage of that and implement all these different procedures that we recommend along the process and then come out with a better outcome, why not?
Mm-hmm.
And just to add that, recently Canada released their budget for 2023. They're pushing for clean energy in their country. So they have introduced tax credits for companies that are pushing towards a cleaner energy for their entire country. So it's important that they're pushing for this, and it's important for the companies to go forward with their projects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. I'm always daunted by the prospect of applying for tax credit. Maybe I've been snake bitten by the past.
Paperwork, yeah.
The American IRS, which you were fortunate to not have in Canada. So, yeah, and the other thing that is really compelling here is 2050 net zero carbon emissions goal. I will say I'm intrigued to hear more about kind of the legal dimension here, and obviously that's one of the 5 that we want to focus on. So can we discuss a little bit about the 2050 net zero carbon emissions goal? And again, I mean, you've laid out a nice toolkit, but I'd like you to play devil's advocate when you talk about that 2050 goal, in the sense that, look, we put a lot of things on paper and we've drawn a lot of benchmarks and said, you know, hell or high water of the state, hell or high water of the state, and we kind of keep doing that. So what disincentivizes action now, in your opinion? In other words, play the devil's advocate, get the opposite argument that you just did, and kind of invite us to consider that, so then we can really get on board with what we need to do in order to meet that 2050 goal. That makes sense.
Well, there's a lot of incentives in these legal documents to do so, and there's a lot of streamlining of the processes, and of course, you know, there's a lot of these goals, they're really brazen to, you know, 2050 net zero, and it's a bit difficult, but it seems as though Canada's committed to that. And while it may seem really daunting, there are those initiatives, there are those, you know, those streamlining processes, like the acceleration of the brine-hosted minerals in the Mineral Resource Development Act, and they're keeping on updating that. So there are opportunities for sure to go ahead with this, and your company can take advantage of those. Yeah.
Are we going to be outpaced by our competition if we don't, since this demand of 600% is going to be incurred in the next 7 years?
that's where one of the benefits of having the faster method of DLE is. With solar evaporation, you have to wait for all that water to go away, take it out and purify it. That 50,000 tons a year, it's like that. It's incredibly quick. And by having several spaced out facilities, you're pulling out a massive amount of lithium very quickly. And also, in regards to the previous part of your question there, we're not saying that Alberta needs to stop with oil and gas right now. It is a strong industry and it is working for them, but they aren't going to have as valuable a product eventually. No one's going to want it anymore, as particularly in Europe and such like that. Some countries may not be able to make certain benchmarks, so there is still value in that oil and gas, and these industries can happen concurrently. But it is important that they make this shift, because if it gets to the point where there's a cutoff, then all of a sudden their economy collapses if they're not prepared.
I think too, to focus on, you know, that the net zero carbon emissions by 2050, like super valid. Like, what would make you think that it's implementable this time? Considering in the past, you know, there are these goals and they happen or they don't. But I think this time, I think realistically looking at, again, the world as a whole, like the demand for electric vehicles, it is huge. Where is that coming from? Where are these batteries coming from? And so you have the power to implement these things, not only sustainably and ethically, but also to contribute to that 2050 goal that is more reasonable today.
I understand. I mean, at one point we said we'd stop using paper by the year 2000, but now that we have tablets, we've cut down a lot, but...
Yeah. Okay, no, that's great. Tom, over to you.
I got a couple of questions. Some of them are pretty basic. What does lithium look like in its natural state?
Its natural state, there are multiple ways. So in the ground in Alberta, it's brines, it's salt water.
So
rock,
is it in solution in salt water?
yes.
Yes.
So that's why the relationship with oil and gas.
Exactly. There's a very minor tinker in technology and skills. And then once it's, and then rock mining is something called spodumene ore, and then they have to process that and get the lithium out of it. And then, like I said, Nevada has clay. They have to churn it, apply a bunch of acids, get the lithium out of it. And then once it's all out and it's ready to go to battery manufacturers, it looks like white salt.
So you're advantaged because your content is already in solution.
Absolutely.
Next question. You have not presented us, or I missed, what the developmental budget is for this. You talk about the subsidies and the grants and all that, but how much money do I have to come up with to do it?
Oh, the first facility would cost $1.037 billion.
Okay, where am I gonna get it?
We were tasked to investigate how you should proceed. You have the mineral titles, and we're discussing how you should proceed, where you want to get that money. I mean, obviously, the Canadian government is offering $20 billion for clean energy, which includes batteries and includes geothermal. So you can get some of it there.
The answer to my question is I gotta get it through conventional finance.
Absolutely. The rest is investment based, but as I said, the World Bank wants you to participate with Indigenous people and cooperate with them.
So maybe they'll make me a loan.
Maybe they will.
That's all I have. Thank you very much. As we now go to feedback.
Well, I have a few more.
Oh, sure, please.
I thought you were done.
Make them right. No, in the moment.
You rested.
I know. It's the second cross-examination, which is obviously illegal. I'm not privy to Canadian standards of legal practice. So, look, yeah, Tom just hit a really good point, and I did ask this already in some valence, and I just want to revisit it because it's so important. As board members here, we're concerned about two things. We're concerned about money coming in and money going out, and to some extent, keeping the powers that be happy. But ultimately, is this solution that you propose going to be viable, notwithstanding all of the other tensions and pressures that companies like us are going to experience, regulatory risk, competitive market landscape, all of these things? If we take your path rather than doing what we've been doing, and it's been working fine, in the day-to-day, make a case to me why the urgency is now to take this action, because it's going to involve a lot of costs for us, and there's a lot of uncertainty whether or not we can recoup this money from the Canadian government. I'm not sure we can. We probably will have to drive a profit through sales and through other means of revenue generation.
Oh, you have a lot of lithium in value in your rights, and it is absolutely profitable. Like I said, if you get that initial investment, you will make back the money for that facility in less than 6 months. So that's very immediate, and because of the demand, it's going to sell, and predictions all say the price of lithium is going to go up. So all of our predictions are very conservative. You're like, the price of lithium, you could easily double that very shortly. And that may even be a case where, much like many countries are stocking oil, if you see a price is low and you think you can hold on to it for a little while and wait for it to bounce back up and you're expecting it to, do it.
And there's also risk. We found that there's risk, so there's some articles that say that the people the companies that are producing lithium right now with the other traditional methods, there's a chance that they might actually have to phase out because it might be not legally viable or environmentally viable to even do so. So if we were to delay it, then we could risk also being part of that group of companies that can, go out of business. Yeah.
Is there, since we're talking about sustainability, is there enough lithium in Alberta to mine for decades on, or are we just going to like start mining and 20 years later we just kind of ravaged the earth over there?
It was 30 years worth, and it doesn't, at the rate that we suggested for withdrawal, and it actually causes no impact. These aquifers are so deep underground and surrounded by bedrock, and the way DLE works is you draw that brine in, it never touches the air. You process it, and then you take out the lithium, and it's still in the pipe, it spits it back down into the aquifer where it came from. So you're causing zero impact to soil, zero impact to the water table, absolutely nothing. Environmentally, it causes no damage.
So with 30 years, for the billions that we're spending, it's a big capital expenditure. Have we addressed like what we're going to do with the facility once there is no more lithium to mine? Is there another source?
You still have the geothermal resources if you use those, and they generate $5 million a year worth of power. You can sell right back to the Alberta grid or sell down to California. They have power issues sometimes. So that is a possibility. And then otherwise, it's because of how small the operation is, it's a small building, right? We're talking 3% of what solar evaporation does, which is pools as far as the eye can see. And so if they're using 100 acres, you're using 3. It's a much smaller facility to build, and so it's not a huge capital loss, and you could restructure the building, use it for something else, or sell it.
So for me, it almost feels like, why aren't we doing this already, right? Is the only barrier, the real barrier, the Indigenous relationship for us to do that? I mean, what is, if we can say there's one big barrier, like what is it? Can we talk about that?
I wouldn't say that Indigenous people are a barrier, because yours, like we said before, our solutions align with your company goals. You want to build a strategic energy future. So, and Indigenous people, when they are listened to, and when they find that there's not a huge impact on their land, they are more willing to sign onto these agreements. So I wouldn't say so much that they're a barrier, per se.
And just to add on, other industries, when they want to start, like, say, your pipeline, they don't consult with Indigenous. They just put up the sign saying, we're going to start building in a week. But the problem is, where's the consultation? Are we going to just start first day and start these litigation? So you have an opportunity to just not have this happen, but to consult with them before we can start building a facility.
And you're still in the planning phases. You haven't started withdrawing your lithium, so this is just the plan going forward. So there's not really any barriers for you. You're just still formulating the plan, and this is the plan we're suggesting. And Indigenous people are not a barrier. They just want the earth to be taken care of, which we all want now, and they want to get paid, and they deserve that money. So.
And by doing so, not only the ethical side of things, but you would also be avoiding any potential blockades or campaigns in your way of these processes. So you would be satisfying their needs as well as your business prospects.
And the legal ramifications, correct? I mean, you said there was some legislative dictums and so forth from the Canadian government that said that these consultations really need to happen.
And particularly in Alberta, because it is treaty land, whereas British Columbia is unceded territory, so there are no treaties that are signed. You're still required to talk to Indigenous people, but because there's no structure, you don't know who you're going to talk to. You talk to somebody, you think you're good, and then somebody else says, no, I don't want you to do that, and now they're protesting. So that framework in Alberta is to your advantage.
All right, enough softballs. Let's think of a really different one. No, I guess if you can focus on one takeaway for us, again, you have quite a bit here, and it's all good stuff. But what should the 30-second elevator speech be call to action?
You're bringing people in, oil and gas is bringing people in from around the world and around the country to work here, and they have an Indigenous population that needs the money. It actually makes 63% of the provincial average in wages, and oil and gas is above the average wage. So you can easily provide decent work to them, and that does provide decent work and prosperity for all. We gotta start with the people who need it the most.
All right, I rest.
Feedback,
Oh, feedback?
which some might call criticism or compliment.
You know, do this. Well done.
Thank you.
You know, you stated the problem clearly. You stated the solution clearly. We talked about the demand side, the supply side. We talked about how we were going to get there. I was waiting for that moment where you were lacking something, but then the slide where the capital costs came and you talked about return on investment, and I was just, man, it's clear. The slides were concise, and sometimes I just feel like when we're presenting, like we want to put everything on there and it becomes overwhelming, but the slides were just enough that we needed, and we followed your voice over it. So I enjoyed it. This was good.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, yeah, you did well, and it was clear you did your homework, well researched, and the presentation itself carried a strong tone. So that was very impressive. I think that just to really highlight and bolster, you know, that first paragraph of your executive summary talks about Indigenous communities and some of the plights that they face and challenges and difficulties. Maybe enter the narrative with kind of painting a picture on a more personal level. I know it's hard to do that and you know, focus on one personal example with this, but if Indigenous groups of the Canadian province of Alberta, in fact, lay claim to so much, and they are such an integral part of this experience, the land, and obviously what goes into doing any kind of business on the land, you know, somehow kind of open the curtain with that being front and center. Because there's two calls to action here. It's engage the native populations, and it's really transition, horizontally diversify, pivot for the sake of Mother Earth and for the sake of your business. And so how do you bring those two together in a more clear framework? Because I almost felt like we're tackling two separate issues. But that's not a criticism. You know, you did both, but just trying to somehow splice the two in a way that's palatable for the audience. What else? The other thing I would say, I know, again, maybe it's just front center because it's tax season, but I'm always like, when I see these tax credits and promises, I'm just like, maybe you guys are better not even to mention that, because it just kind of sounds, unless there's some like bona fide, hey, this is guaranteed as cash flows for you if this happens, and really make that a point. Just be like, yeah, and there's $40 million to support regulation and permitting, because as someone in the audience, I'm really gonna like pry at that and be like, okay, how is that in fact going to end up contributing to our bottom line? And maybe it won't, but
yeah, that's fair. The Canadian government really likes giving away money more than the American government, so it's a little easier, but
I sure hope so. I've just been pulling teeth to get our electric vehicle tax credit.
Oh yeah.
But that's a separate story for today. Again, you know, I'm not being critical. Overall, I was very impressed. So
Thank you so much.
thank you.
I can't say too much more than has already been said. I think the manner of presentation that you chose, the rapid fire swaps, is really good. You don't see it very often in these competitions. In fact, I'm not sure I've ever seen it.
Thank you.
One person has a subject, they exhaust the subject, and it goes to the next guy, and she exhausts the subject, but this method is really effective. It causes the audience to pay attention.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I think that your presentation was pretty comprehensive and pretty good, and I'm going to grade it like that.
Thank you so much.
The object, I'll just share a little anecdotal material here. I'm involved in an enormous piece of litigation in Alaska that comes from the fact that years ago the United States government gave most of Alaska to the Indians. And they run it just like they own it. it's awful. The
Yeah.
opportunity for corruption is
Mhm.
magnificent.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much for
Thank you.
participating.
Thank you
so much.
We appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I like the outfits too.
Thank you.
I don't want to be the one in the room when you walk in the 5 minutes.